Alright, Lego's back with a mini project here after the last big one. Needed a little breather, and this is what I had in mind. I had a pretty recent idea of making some Mosaic Gallifreyan, and the first step of that was to make the actual Mosaic pattern, and I did not want to make some predefined, pre-made image just grabbed off online and just tracing over that. I wanted to see if I could make a dynamic, organic system on my own to make a random pattern of tiles that would be dense enough and coherent enough to actually work as a pattern. Most of what you're seeing right now, and for the first 5-6 minutes here, will be me trying to figure out a way of using the density distribution, using um, the touch distribution, and all sorts of other distribution tools in Inkscape to see if I can make some sort of uniform pattern where the different tiles, I mean, they're not real tiles, they're just individual objects, but I treat them as tiles. The individual tiles will be close enough together to function as, touching elements, but also at the same time remove all of that extra space in between so that it actually works as a pattern. There's some align and distribute options in the menu that makes something not touch each other. And at first, I tried to make that work for a system of making something touch. Like I tried to make it nest together as well as I could. That didn't work out. I tried using different thicknesses to my advantage to make the gaps disappear. That didn't work out. I used extensively, as you might have seen, the spray tool to see if I could make a pattern that way, because it has the nice feature of making sure nothing overlaps. Because if everything just overlaps all the time, then I'm not going to have a pattern. I'm just going to have a bunch of obscured tiles. And as you can see there, my efforts weren't really working out. So that was my first few tries. Now I'm doing something a little bit different. Now I am taking a white fill, and then I'm just spamming the whole thing with a bunch of different types of tiles. Now I took a bitmap copy of that, and then I took a trace of the bitmap copy to get that uniform trace that I need. So in a roundabout way, this time I didn't care about the actual overlaps, because the overlaps are hidden behind the fill. And when you do a trace of a bitmap, you don't see anything behind. You just see the actual black and white image. So that worked out perfectly. This is probably something I'm going to do a standalone tutorial on, because it seems like a niche way of making mosaic patterns dynamically, organically, without using any form of live path effect, which is the other way around you would do this, I suppose. But here we are. I made the base tile background, which is dense enough that I can make some pretty sophisticated shapes with, but still has that very unique, very simple, way of representing the different tiles. So you can see now I made some basic text on a lower layer, put it in behind the tiles, and then I am trying to now basically trace it over with the bucket tool, which is ironically enough the best way of going about this that I found, because it treats everything like an organic piece on its own. It makes some okay fills without being too rigid. They're pretty soft. They're pretty rounded. They're not strictly filling out the whole tile. Sometimes more, sometimes less. It's very dynamic. It's very organic. It's not it's not rigid, and that's perfect for my needs. So you'll see here, on and off, I try to capture the the actual tileness of the tiles, the different windows, the different panes. They're not supposed to be straight lines. They're not supposed to be perfectly sharp, clear edges. So I have a lot of the pieces that share a tile with the actual text. I fill them out completely so that the different pieces of glass essentially take up more area than the actual text is supposed to do. So that way I get some text that bleeds out from the sharp outline of the original text. It just gives it a more organic feel, and it looks better somehow. It looks more like it actually is, you know, stained pieces of glass, like you would see in a church maybe. Of course, church artwork would be better than this, but that's sort of the point. This is raw. This is recognizable as text, but it still has that very clear mosaic, make do, makeshift, not perfectly symmetrical, not perfectly aligned way of going about it. So it still has that organic, non-uniform feel to it, and there is some gaps everywhere. I'm not filling everything out. One, because it would take ages, and two, because it would ruin the effect that I'm going for here. It's imperfect, it's rough, and it has, you know, small imperfections and holes all over the place, filled with lead. Once I get to that point, so what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to treat this as, you know, actual pieces of stained glass. You don't get perfect shapes there. You get semi-perfect shapes that fit together semi-perfectly, and you have these small outlines, these small segments that stick out or lack in the outline. The trick is to make sure the lacks and the holes in my text are strategically placed so that you can still clearly see what's going on. I don't want to be ambiguous in where whether or not a certain line meets a certain object, or whether there's a dot or it's just poorly matched to the outline of the base shape. So if there's a dot, I want it to be clear that it's not connected to anything else. If it's part of a bigger piece of text, I want it to be connected clearly. So there are some junction points that I need to be very clear on, and that's just the way it goes. But even with me filling out the majority of the holes to really give a clear effect of where everything is relative to everything else, it still gets that really organic vibe. So I don't feel like I ruin anything by making it almost but not quite perfect. You can see every time I remove the panes, it's still very clearly mosaic, or some sort of tile, imperfect tiling. So I'm very happy with that. Now, for the overarching project here, this is more or less just a proof of concept, so I don't really have any overarching plans with this, which is why the following segments now is, well, they're not the best way to go about it. I shot for the hip here, and I had an idea, but it's not. I mean, in hindsight, I could have done this quicker, smarter, and almost end up with the same effect. But here we are. What I'm doing now is I made a quick gradient in the background there to sort of have something to relate to. And now I'm filling in with the bucket tool different bigger panes in the background, so that I'm going to unionize those later, and have some bigger panes to work with for the background. So I don't want 10,000 small pieces of background. I want maybe 50 bigger pieces of background, because the detail lies in the text itself. I need the very granular, very finely the fine resolution for the text. I don't need a fine resolution for the background. It's just going to be a blue sky, slightly darker at the top and then lighter at the bottom. But I don't need the resolution there, so I'm making some bigger panes. And again, I'm leaving a lot of holes here. There's a lot of holes, and that's fine. That's fair. I don't have the time or inclination to fill those out because it would ruin the authenticity. That's the one. That's the one aspect of this approach I like better, because I could have just made a big, rough pattern the same way I did the fine granular pattern, just on the background level. Make some random shapes, overlap them, make a bitmap, trace that, and voila, you have a fine pattern for the background that's rougher. The only thing I wouldn't get by doing that would be the holes between the pieces of the glass. So right now I do have some small pieces here and there that are still missing, that I did not color in, and that's going to show up in the final product, and that's fine. I think I like that. But it would have been faster to make some big panes, big piece of glass, the same way I did the granular pattern at the front at the start of the project, and then I could have quickly done the same thing I did here. But back to this granular approach. What I'm doing right now is I'm taking all the individual segments that I colored, and then I took a variety of different ways basically I want to unionize different segments, and sometimes I can do that based off of color, sometimes I could do that based off of proximity, and sometimes I just have to sit down and pick all the pieces up individually until I have the selection I need. Make a unionize that thing and then make it black, just for reference. Once I have gotten all the pieces of glass, I'm going to color it in roughly based on the gradient in the background there. So it's going to match roughly what's behind there, and the effect, as you'll see in a moment, is going to be um, it's not a perfect what's the word? It's not a perfect gradient. Sometimes it's lighter than it's supposed to be, sometimes it's darker than it's supposed to be. But the overall effect here, as you can see, is going to be some different shades of blue, a bit lighter at the bottom, a bit darker at the top. And the overall finished effect is that it's still gray. It's still a gradient-ish, but the gradient has distinct phases or zones, which is what I wanted with this piece. And the final step here before we color in the actual text is I need to be very careful about what I do with the actual lead, like the black border between each pane. But depending on how Inkscape works and how you set it up, you can have a stroke on top or at the bottom of the fill for an object, and it's the same for the different layers. I need to be very careful that I have the right amount of thickness between the panes relative to what I started out with. Otherwise, it's going to look thin or thick, too thin or too thick. So that's why the thicknesses vary a lot through this project. If you pay attention to the border between the panes, it'll be very different depending on what I'm doing at any point in time, because I'm shifting the layers around a lot to get the effect that I need. Now, a quick detour here to see if I can add some fill or some noise to the planes, because they look too clean right now. Stained glass is not clean by its nature, so I'm trying to, first of all, I'm going to give the lead a little bit of depth with a filter. That was one of my original ideas for this project. That's not something I've figured out just now. I always wanted to do some lead, but the noise in the panes themselves, that was a new thing I needed to figure out, because it didn't feel right. It felt too clean. So I added in a few different variations of a fill for the for the blue background. I have a little library where I have a lot of the effects just put out on a few different test pieces, so I have a rough idea of what it's like. In 1.4 you can do some other things, but I couldn't, obviously, and haven't done that for many years. But here we are with a piece of noise that I can live with, and I'm going to do a little bit of touch color on the actual text itself. I made it golden, as you can see, and there's a subtle blur on top of it to sort of diffuse the light a little bit. Like if the sun is outside that window and it's shining in, it's going to diffuse the gold a little bit on the surrounding pieces. So that is that's a slight hidden effect you might see there on top. I have a copy off to the right there, but essentially it just diffuses the light a little bit and makes it blur the lines a little bit more. Now I added some extra lightness to the center there, and I added a little bit, maybe you call it a little clipped group off to the sides to darken the edges a little bit. But other than that, this is a pretty nice piece of concept, proof of concept for how you might be going about making some mosaic art. Very dynamic, very organic, um, and still recognizable as text, essentially. So I'm pretty happy with that. Thank you for watching. And as I said, I might make a separate standalone video on how these mosaic steps might look like if you were actually to do it smarter than me. So watch out for that if you want to. All right, bye.